We don't have $5,000, Lauren. Stop being dramatic and figure it out yourself. My mother hung up before I could even beg. I was holding an eviction notice, terrified that I would be sleeping in my broken-down car by the weekend. 2 minutes later my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the family group chat. My mother had just posted a screenshot of a bank transfer. Amount, $5,000. To my younger sister Jessica. Memo, have the best time in Bali, sweetie. You deserve a mental health break. I stared at the screen. The exact amount that would have saved me from being homeless was just given to my sister for a beach vacation. Have you ever watched your family throw money at someone else right after telling you they were completely broke? Tell me your story in the comments. That screenshot didn't just break my heart. It unlocked a vault of memories I had spent years trying to suppress. It was like a light switch flipped on in a dark room and suddenly I could see the clutter of my entire life for what it really was. I realized I wasn't hated. Hate would have required passion. Hate would have required them to actually think about me. No, it was worse than that. I was just useful. I was the utility child. I remember being 16. Most kids were worried about prom dates or geometry tests. I was worried about the red notice on the power bill. My father, Jonathan, had spent his paycheck on a business investment that turned out to be a scam, and my mother was too embarrassed to ask her parents for help. So I picked up double shifts at the diner after school. I handed over my envelope of tips, $340 all in ones and fives, so the lights wouldn't get cut off. That same week, my sister Jessica started private ballet lessons. They cost $200 a month. When I asked how we could afford that when we couldn't afford electricity, my mother looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes and said, Jessica needs her art, Lauren. It's her escape. You're strong enough to handle the reality, she isn't. I wore that like a badge of honor. I was the strong one. I was the protector. I didn't know then that strong was just their code word for exploitable. Fast forward to when I was 22. I had just graduated college, the first in my family to do so. I received a $2,000 signing bonus for my first junior analyst job. I wanted to use it for a deposit on an apartment. But then my father sat me down at the kitchen table, head in his hands. He had maxed out a credit card and was terrified it would ruin the family's credit score right before they tried to refinance the house. He didn't demand the money. He just sighed and said, I don't know what we're going to do. I guess we'll lose the house. So, of course, I wrote the check. I saved the day. I saved the house. And 2 months later, they bought Jessica a brand new car because she was stressed about taking the bus to her part-time job. Sitting on the floor of my freezing Chicago apartment at 29 years old, the pattern finally made sense. I had spent my entire life believing that if I just gave enough, fixed enough, and paid enough, I would eventually earn my place in the family. I thought love was a transaction and I just hadn't paid the full price yet. But looking at that transfer receipt for Jessica's vacation, I realized the truth. I wasn't an investment to them. I was an appliance. You don't love your toaster. You don't thank your refrigerator. You just expect them to work. And when an appliance breaks, when it stops being useful, you don't fix it. You throw it out. I had run out of money. I had broken. And so, to Diana and Jonathan, I was now garbage. I stood up. My legs were stiff from the cold. I didn't call them back. I didn't send a text. I grabbed 2 suitcases and started packing. I took only what I could carry. I left the furniture, the dishes, the reminders of the life I had tried so hard to build. I walked out of that apartment at 3 in the morning. I got into my car, which rattled and groaned when I turned the key, and I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't going back to being their utility. If they wanted to survive without their safety net, they were about to find out exactly how expensive gravity really is. That Thanksgiving was the quietest day of my life. I didn't go to a family gathering. I didn't have friends to crash with. I ended up at Jerry's 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the menus are sticky and the coffee tastes like burnt hazelnuts. I ordered the turkey special. When it arrived, swimming in yellow gravy, I broke. I didn't make a sound, but the tears just started sliding down my face, dripping onto the paper placemat. I felt entirely transparent, like a ghost haunting a booth. Excuse me, a deep voice said. I looked up, wiping my face with a napkin that felt like sandpaper. A man was standing there. He was older, distinguished, wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than my car. Beside him was a woman with kind eyes and a silk scarf. They looked like they had taken a wrong turn on the way to a country club. My wife and I hate eating alone, the man said. He didn't mention the crying. He didn't offer pity. He offered dignity. We're Thomas and Elizabeth. Would you mind if we joined you? I nodded, too stunned to speak. They slid into the booth opposite me. They didn't ask about my family. They asked about me. They asked what I was reading, what I wanted to do with my life, what I thought about the terrible coffee. For 2 hours, I wasn't the utility child. I was just Lauren. That dinner didn't end when the check came. It turned into coffee the next week. Then Sunday dinners at their estate. Then slowly, terrifyingly, it turned into love. Over the next 5 years, the Sullivans didn't just befriend me. They rebuilt me. Thomas, a corporate titan who bought and sold companies for sport, taught me how to negotiate my salary. When I told him I was afraid to ask for a raise, he looked at me and said, Lauren, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you leverage. Elizabeth taught me that love didn't come with a bill attached. When I got sick with the flu, she came over and made soup. I tried to pay her for the groceries, panicking that I was accruing debt. She just laughed and tucked me in. You can't buy a mother's worry, honey. It's free. And then there was Daniel, their son. He came home from a business trip in London one Christmas, walked into the living room where I was helping Elizabeth hang ornaments and stopped dead. We didn't have a cinematic romance. We had a quiet, steady recognition. He was the first man who looked at my independence not as a challenge to be broken, but as a foundation to build on. But the real shift happened 3 months before the wedding. I was sitting in Thomas's library, a room that smelled of old paper and expensive scotch, going over the guest list. I was shaking. I had to tell them that my biological parents weren't just estranged, they were dangerous to my peace. I can't invite them, I whispered. But I'm afraid if I don't, they'll find a way to claim rights to me. To guilt me. Thomas set down his pen. He looked at Elizabeth, then opened a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a thick document and slid it across the mahogany surface. We were going to wait until your birthday, Thomas said, his voice unusually thick. But we think you need this protection now. I looked at the header. Petition for adult adoption. I don't understand, I stammered. I'm 29. The law doesn't care about age, Thomas said firmly. This cuts the legal tie. It changes your birth certificate. It makes you a Sullivan in the eyes of the state, the courts, and the world. Diana and Jonathan will have zero claim on you. You will be our daughter legally and permanently. I looked at the paper. It wasn't just a document. It was a shield. It was the armor I had needed since I was 16 years old, sitting in the dark. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name, and with that ink I severed the last thread connecting me to the people who had thrown me away. I was finally safe. Or so I thought. The adoption was supposed to be the end of the story. A happy ending where the orphan gets the family, the paperwork gets filed, and everyone lives happily ever after. But in the world of high-stakes corporate law, the world Thomas Sullivan lived in, nothing is official until the due diligence is done. A week after I signed the petition, Thomas asked me to meet with his personal attorney, Mr. Vance, to finalize the financial separation from my biological parents. It was supposed to be a formality, a dotting the I's meeting. I walked into the glass-walled conference room expecting a handshake and a notary stamp. Instead, I found Mr. Vance sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by stacks of paper. He didn't look like a man celebrating a family union. He looked like a man who had just found a body in the trunk of a car. Lauren, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Please sit down. Thomas was there too, standing by the window, his back stiff. That was my first clue that the ground was about to open up. Is something wrong? I asked, setting my bag down. Did the adoption fall through? The adoption is fine, Mr. Vance said. He slid a thick file across the polished table. It hit the wood with a heavy, dull thud. But in preparing the financial severance documents, we ran a standard audit on all prior financial associations linked to your social security number. We found discrepancies. I opened the folder. It was a stack of IRS tax returns. My parents' tax returns. I don't understand, I said, scanning the lines of numbers that blurred together. I haven't lived with them in 10 years. Our finances aren't linked. Look at line 6C, Mr. Vance said, pointing with a gold pen. And look at the attached Schedule R. I looked. There, in black and white, listed under dependents, was my name. Lauren Elizabeth. But it was the box next to it that made the room spin. Check if permanently and totally disabled. There was a check mark. For the last 10 years, Mr. Vance said, his voice terrifyingly calm, Jonathan and Diana have been filing as your caretakers. They have claimed the maximum deduction for a permanently disabled adult child. They have also been collecting state stipend checks for in-home care, sent to a P.O. box in a neighboring county. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I work. I pay taxes. How did the IRS not catch this? Because they forged medical documents, Thomas said, turning from the window. His face wasn't angry, it was lethal. They created a paper trail of a daughter who was incapacitated, unable to work, and fully reliant on them. They effectively legally erased your competence to steal about $15,000 a year. I did the math in my head. 10 years. $150,000. They had told me they were broke. They had refused me $5,000 to keep me off the streets. And all that time, they were collecting 3 times that amount every single year by telling the government I was a cripple. I looked at the documents again. I saw a forged signature from a doctor I'd never met. I saw the dates, years when I was working double shifts, years when I was eating ramen, years when I was begging them for love. They had monetized my existence while treating me like a burden. "This is a federal felony," Mr. Vance said. "Wire fraud, tax fraud, identity theft. If we report this, they go to prison for a minimum of 10 years. Thomas walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "It's your call, Lauren. We can turn this over to the FBI today. Or..." He let the sentence hang. I closed the folder. The cardboard felt cool under my fingers. I thought about the wedding coming up. I thought about their arrogance. I thought about the text message sending Jessica to Bali. If I sent them to jail now, they would play the victim. They would cry to the extended family that I was a vindictive daughter who ruined them over a clerical error. They would become martyrs. "No," I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears. Heavier. Darker. "Don't send it to the FBI. Not yet." I picked up the file. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a loaded gun. "I'm going to invite them to the wedding," I said. Thomas raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. He saw the look in my eyes. He knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't going to just defeat them. I was going to let them walk into a trap so deep they would never climb out. "Let them come," I whispered. "Let them think they've won." The wedding day arrived with the kind of weather you usually have to bribe a deity for. 75 degrees, a light breeze coming off the Pacific, and the sky a shade of blue that made the ocean look dull. The Sullivan estate in Malibu was transformed into a fortress of white roses and silk ribbons. I stood on the balcony of the bridal suite watching the guests arrive. There were senators, tech moguls, and A-list celebrities. People whose time was worth thousands of dollars a minute, all here to celebrate Daniel and me. But my eyes weren't on the A-list. I was watching the main gate. At 2:15, a rented luxury sedan rolled up. It was flashy, a little too loud for the setting, much like the people inside. My biological parents stepped out. Diana was wearing a floor-length gold gown that looked like she was trying to win an Oscar. Jonathan was in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight, looking around with a mix of hunger and calculation. They hadn't been invited. I had blocked their numbers 5 years ago. But in the age of social media, nothing stays secret forever, especially not a wedding to the son of Thomas Sullivan. They didn't look like parents coming to see their daughter. They looked like predators who had smelled blood in the water. I watched them march up to the security checkpoint. I could see Diana arguing with the head of security, pointing a manicured finger at the guest list. She was probably saying something about parental rights or disrespect. The guard, a massive man named Cole who used to be Secret Service, didn't flinch. He touched his earpiece. "Target is at the gate," Cole's voice crackled over the radio in the suite. "Orders." I pressed the button on my walkie-talkie. "Let them in, Cole." Protocol B. Protocol B wasn't the seating chart. It was the containment plan. I watched as Cole's demeanor shifted. He nodded to them, opened the heavy iron gates, and gestured for a staff member. They weren't led to the garden where the ceremony was about to begin. They were escorted toward the main house. "They think they've won," Elizabeth said, coming up behind me to adjust my veil. She looked out the window at the gold dress shimmering in the sunlight. "Look at them strut. They don't think they've won a daughter back," I said, my voice steady. "They think they've won the lottery." We had discovered through the grapevine, my Aunt Patricia, that Jonathan's business was underwater. They weren't here for sentiment. They were here because they assumed a billionaire family would pay a high price to avoid a scene. They were here for a payout. A dowry. A bribe. I watched the staff member lead them up the front steps and through the massive oak doors of the main house. They were heading straight for Thomas's private library. A soundproof room. A room with no audience. "Are you ready?" Elizabeth asked. I turned away from the window. I thought about the girl freezing in Chicago. I thought about the forged medical records. I thought about the 10 years of my life they had stolen and sold to the IRS for a tax break. "I've been ready for 5 years," I said. I picked up my bouquet. It was heavy, anchored by white lilies. But the heaviest thing in the room was the file folder sitting on the vanity table. I handed it to Elizabeth. "Let's go say hello." The library was silent. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room before an explosion. Thomas sat behind his massive oak desk, hands folded. Elizabeth stood by the fireplace. Mr. Vance, the lawyer, was leaning against a bookshelf, looking like a shark in a 3-piece suit. The heavy doors opened and Cole ushered my biological parents inside. Diana entered first, smoothing her gold dress as her eyes swept the lavish library. Not at me but at the wealth. Jonathan followed, puffed up with borrowed confidence. It's time we were properly introduced, Diana said to Thomas, all fake warmth. We're the parents. I know who you are, Thomas replied, unmoved. She sat without invitation. We forgive Lauren for running off. We're here to support her on her big day. Then she slid a napkin across the desk. $50,000. Think of it as compensation, she whispered. For appearances. Jonathan nodded. We just want what's fair. You taught her survival, Thomas said coldly. Including cutting out cancer. He covered the napkin with a blue folder. Inside was a court order. Final decree of adult adoption. Lauren is legally our daughter, he said. You have no claim. You're strangers. Diana exploded, until I spoke. Mr. Vance. The second file. The red folder hit the desk. Tax fraud. Forged disability claims. Years of stolen benefits. 15 to 20 years, Thomas said calmly. Each. Diana collapsed. What do you want? I want you gone, I said, placing an ND on top. Sign it, leave quietly, and this file stays here. Make a scene and it goes to the IRS. They signed. They fled. Outside, Diana's phone buzzed. It's Jessica, she whispered. Her card was declined. She wants to know if we got the check. There was no check. The door closed behind them and the silence lifted. Thomas smiled. Ready to get married? I'm ready. We returned to music light and the family I chose. Because family isn't blood. It's who stands with you when it finally matters.